So I've opened up the same illustration in Illustrator, but this time I want to use a different technique to apply texture. In this case, I'm going to use blending modes to apply the texture and retain the photographic quality of the original photographic image. So I've got my texture samples open here, and this time I'm going to use the paper texture. So once again, I'm going to drag that into Photoshop to prepare it for my use in Illustrator. So once I'm in Photoshop, I can go up to Image, Mode, and Grayscale. So once again, I'm going to get rid of any color that's in the texture image. In this case, there's not really any color, but there might be a little bit of warm tones in the shadows. So just to be sure, I'll change it to Grayscale. And then once again, I'm also going to go to Image, Adjustments, and Brightness Contrast to just increase the difference between lights and darks. Again, that's going to give me more of the texture and less of those mid-gray tones that are going to end up muddying up all my colors. Also going to turn the brightness up just a little bit in this case. Okay, that looks good, so I'll click OK to apply it. And then I'm going to go to File and Save to save this image. And in this case, I'm saving it as a JPEG. That's totally fine since we're not using the bitmap TIFF technique. We don't need to use a bitmap mode or a TIFF file format. So JPEG is going to work just fine in this case. All right, so let's go to Illustrator. I've got that same document open. We'll go ahead and grab that image that I just created and drag it right inside. Okay, it's a little big, so I'm just going to shrink it down. And then we can go ahead and apply this. In this case, I want to apply it to the actual background of the image. So a few ways I can do this. I can either put it behind the background color and set the background color to multiply, or I can set the image itself to multiply and leave it on top. Because one way or the other, I'm going to want those two tones to combine together so that I can apply the blue color to the texture and the texture to the blue color. So in this case, I'm going to select the image. And then if I go to opacity in the control panel, I can set my blending mode to multiply. And when I do that, you can see that the overlapping area is applying the texture to the underlying color. Okay, so I'm going to move that texture into place. And the other thing I want to do is just constrain that texture to the actual blue color. So I can use a clipping mask to do that. So I'm just going to make a copy of that background. And then if I paste in place, it's going to put that on top, and I can use that shape as a mask to create a clipping mask for this texture. So I'm going to hold down Shift so I can select both of those. And then if I right or control click, I can go down to Make Clipping Mask. And there we go. I've got it set in the right place. Okay, so currently, since this image is on top of everything else, it's also applying texture to the heart and to the typography. You can see if I zoom in, there's a little bit of texture being applied to that type. And this is going to depend on where it is in the layer stack. So since it's on top, it's applying texture to everything. If I select that texture and the background element together, and then go up to Object, Arrange, and Send to Back, now it's underneath the type and the heart. And so now it's only on the background and not on the heart itself. Okay, one more adjustment I can make is selecting that texture layer and turning down the opacity. At 100%, you're going to get the texture at full strength, but in a lot of cases, you're going to want the texture to be more subtle, and opacity is a good way to affect the strength of that texture. So if I turn this down to 50%, you can see that the texture is much more subtle, and in the places where the texture was really light, it's almost completely gone. Okay, so it's up to you what level you want to set your texture at, but it generally depends on the intensity of the texture that you're using and the overall effect that you're going for. Okay, so I also have a heart here. This heart has sort of a flat graphic to it. And this time I'm going to actually layer some elements together, because in Photoshop or in vector illustration in general, layering things together is going to make it more interesting. It's going to add a lot of depth. So what I'm going to do is go back to my paper texture and add another version of it on top of the heart element itself. So let me go back to that folder. I'm going to grab the paper texture again. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and apply it right on top of the heart. So I'm going to shrink it down in size. And I think I'll use the more intense area of the texture and just sort of put that over the heart. Okay, so I need to constrain this to the heart itself. So I'm going to make a copy of this heart shape. I'm going to select both halves of it, go to Edit, Copy, and then Paste in place. Okay, so now I have a second version. I also want to combine these two together because I want to use the heart shape as a mask, but since it's currently two different shapes, I have to combine it first. So I'm going to use the Pathfinder tool and choose Unite. That will make this shape into one shape. So you can see I have the underlying heart and then the copy is on top. Okay, and then if I bring my texture back in, I can select both of these to create a clipping mask. So once again, I've limited the texture to just the heart itself. So now if I set this to multiply, the heart will have a separate version of the texture compared to the background. This is a good way to work. A lot of times you don't want to just apply texture to everything, but instead put different instances of the same texture into the different elements. That's going to create more layering and more depth and maintain the separation between the elements without it all just blending together. Okay, so let's continue layering stuff together. So I'm going to go ahead and select my heart. Okay, and I actually want to select all the hearts. So I'm going to go ahead and click and drag to create a selection area. Then I'm going to hold down Shift and click and drag to deselect those outside elements. And then I'm going to right click and go to Group. Okay, so now I have the heart on a separate group. And so if I select one part of the heart, I'm actually selecting all of it. So that grouping is going to help me work a little bit more efficiently. Okay, so let's select the heart, and then I'm also going to change this to multiply as well. So now it's going to actually multiply that color over the background, so I'm getting kind of a deeper purple, and the textures are actually layering together. Okay, so I'm getting more of that layering effect. Let's go ahead and increase the layering some more by making this a bit bigger, and we can bring it up and actually change the typography to layer on top. So since we're working with some darker colors, let's go ahead and change the typography to white. Okay, and then we'll go up to Object and Arrange and Send to Front to bring that in front of the heart. Okay, there we go. So now we have much more layering happening within the document, and that layering is more interesting than when everything was separate. For one last finishing touch, let's go ahead and grab another texture. I'm going to go back to my folder. And let's grab this etching illustration of a brain, okay, and bring that into the document. Okay, so this is an image. It's a photograph, but it's a photograph of an old etching. And these etchings are very textural, so they're a great opportunity to add more texture into your illustrations. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and set this to multiply. Okay, and then when I do that, you can see that the etching melts into the underlying layers. Go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. And I also want to bring it underneath the typography. So I'm going to kind of center it, get it to the size I want it, and then I can select it and use Object Arrange, Send backwards to bring it down one layer so it's underneath the typography. Because I want the typography to be very, easily viewable. Okay, so there we go. I'm going to center that up. And then the last thing I'm going to do is just change the opacity of the brain because it's almost a little too intense and it's sort of taking away from the overall experience. So I'm going to select it and just bring the opacity down. And there we go. Now it's a little bit more subtle. So that's just an example of how you can use those photographs to add a lot of layers into your illustration. And if you go back to what we started with, you'll see that this is actually a much more interesting, illustration overall, because there's elements, the elements are interacting with each other, and that interaction creates a conceptual quality that's really going to drive home the message. So instead of just saying heart and showing a heart, we're layering in a brain, we're layering in different textures, and that's going to create something with a lot of sophistication.